One thing that frustrates a lot of people as you get into trigonometry is we're so used to measuring angles in degrees, and then all of a sudden we switch over to something called radians. And I remember when I was first learning it, not realizing, where does this radians thing come from? Why can't we just keep going with degrees? And when you think about it, radians is a much easier way to look at things. When you consider that a full circle is 360 degrees, I mean, it's kind of random that we split up this circle into 360 parts, whereas a full circle in radians is 2 pi. Now, where does this 2 pi come from? Well, if you take the circumference of any circle, that's equal to 2 times pi times r. And that's just, pi just shows up as this natural ratio whenever you're working with circles. And so if we divide any circumference, no matter what way, if you could have it in feet, you could have it in meters, it doesn't really make a difference. If you divide it by its radius, you're always going to come up with 2 pi. And so as we get into trigonometry, we start using 2 pi as a way to measure the degrees within this circle. And that will become important when you start looking at sines, cosines, tangents, and we start looking at the unit circle and the cyclical nature of all of that. It just makes sense to start using radians. Now, if you have degrees and you need to figure out what it is in radians or vice versa, that's a very simple thing to do. We know that 180 degrees is equal to pi. Okay, so a half a circle is 180 degrees. Well, if the full circle is 2 pi, half the circle is just pi. So if you know the degrees, you can just plug it in here to our equation, divide by 180, multiply it times pi, and you'll figure out what it is in radians. And vice versa, if you know what it is in radians, you just plug that in here and you work out the math, and it'll tell you what it is in degrees. So if you need to go back and forth, just make sure you know this equation right here, and you can, it's a plug and chug. Most of the time when you're working with this, you're going to have to use a calculator, unless you're going to leave it in terms of pi, which is fine. In fact, a lot of times it is easier to use terms of pi. But as we get into the unit circle, you're going to want to get used to expressing those angles in terms of pi or by using radians. That can get a little complicating. Once you get used to it, you're going to find that it's much easier to begin to see relationships between, again, the cyclical nature of that circle and how everything fits together, and why our sines and cosines and tangents, why they're equal to, or maybe equal to the opposite, where you have a positive version here, but all of a sudden you've got a negative version over here in another quadrant. We'll get into that when we get into the unit circle, but there is a purpose behind it. Don't get frustrated with it, but this is something that you're going to use the more you get into mathematics. It's worth your time to understand the difference between radians and degrees. And by the way, if it's not listed, if it doesn't say degrees, if it just, let's say you get the angle is equal to 4, you have to assume that that's in radians. If there's no term given or no degrees or anything given, it just says 4, you can assume that it's automatically in radians. Hopefully this is helpful to you. Please like and subscribe. Pass this information on to those who it might be helpful to. And as always, thanks for watching.